Warning: this video contains discussions of violence, death, and disturbing events. All information presented is based on public records, police reports, and witness statements. Some details may be difficult for certain viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Everyone mentioned in this video is innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. This case remains unsolved. We encourage viewers to do their own research and form their own opinions. The story continues where part 1 left off. A woman alone in her apartment, a neighborhood full of people who claimed they saw nothing, and an investigation twisting through rumors, debts, jealousy, and fear. And now detectives were turning to the people connected not just to Opal, but to the men they believed were tangled in something much bigger. One of those men was Gary. Gary's attorney contacted Lieutenant Todd, said that Gary might have information that could help in the investigation. When detectives spoke with Gary, he told them about Denny coming to his house and accusing him of having substance that had been stolen from Opal's home. Gary said that DJ had also been at his house about 3 weeks earlier and told him that Mike said Eddie had tried to get Mike to go into Opal's house with him on the night she passed. Gary said he later talked to Ronald, who told him the reason Eddie wasn't talking was because Eddie's father was somehow involved and Eddie didn't want to get him into trouble. Gary said he even spoke to Eddie while Eddie was in the county jail, through Eddie's girlfriend on a 3-way call. He said Eddie swore he had nothing to do with Opal's passing. Gary was eventually charged with 2 counts of complicity to burglary, but he agreed to take a polygraph regarding the information he had shared with detectives. Investigators then turned back to Eddie, the man whose name was coming up again and again in the interviews. Eddie had already been arrested and charged for Opal's death, but when he took his polygraph, the results came back inconclusive. Because of that, Eddie was released. And while detectives never stated their own opinion about why the results were inconclusive, what remained clear was that no second test was ever given, something that would later raise questions about the direction of the investigation. Eddie told detectives he didn't know who harmed Opal. He said he was at home, sleeping, and that his girlfriend always took him to and from work. His girlfriend, who was 8.5 months pregnant, confirmed that she usually picked Eddie up in the morning after his shift and drove him home. She said she believed he stayed out of trouble, and she insisted he didn't drive. She didn't remember much about that specific Tuesday, but she said that when she picked Eddie up on work mornings, they normally slept until around 10 or 11. Eddie's sister Veronica also spoke with detectives. She said that Eddie and his girlfriend were at the house that Tuesday afternoon between 4 and 4:30 and stayed until around 6:30 or 10. Veronica said Eddie appeared sober and that he usually didn't get high when he had to work. But while Eddie was giving detectives his version of the night, another voice quietly stepped into the case, an unidentified woman who knew Eddie and some of the others from around town. She called the bar the week after Opal passed. While talking to the bartender, she recognized Mike B's voice in the background and asked to speak with him. She said she spoke with Mike often, so she knew it was him. She told detectives that Mike told her Gary had tried to set up burglaries and that Gary wanted him to do a house by the bar, but Mike had refused. She said Mike also told her that Gary knew a woman who dealt green on Sylvester and wanted Eddie to rob her. She said Eddie later called her on Thursday sounding upset, telling her how badly he had been screwing up on substances and that he had really messed up this time. When she asked what he meant, she said Eddie told her he blacked out, cut her a lot, didn't know how bad he hurt her, and left to go to the bar. He said he didn't get what he went there for. She said she talked to Mike the next day, and that's when she put 2 and 2 together and realized the woman Eddie had described matched the description of the woman who'd been found deceased on Sylvester. Eddie had described Opal as being in her early 40s, weighing around 130, with partially bleached hair. She also said that Eddie and Mike often talked openly around her because she had known them for a long time. She said both men were heavy into substances and were always ripping off stores like Kmart to sell items for more substances. She said Eddie had been violent before, even coming into the bar one time with red fluid all over him, claiming he had beaten a woman. And then came the witness, who saw something that made investigators pause. The person said that on the evening Opal passed, they saw a white male standing behind the victim's apartment near her car. He was dressed in dark clothing, wearing a backward baseball cap that appeared to have two colors on it. They couldn't say how tall he was, but the image of him standing there, just behind the building where Opal lived, stayed with them. Detectives continued collecting evidence. When they executed a search warrant at Eddie's home while he was in custody, Sergeant Pfeiffer, Sergeant Ingram, and Officer Mack arrived at the address. The door was answered by Eddie's mother, Barbara, who allowed them inside. Barbara said Eddie stayed in the front room and that all his belongings were kept there. Detectives found a pair of pants that appeared to have red fluid on the front and a small pocket knife with red discoloration on the handle. Both items were sent to BCI, along with other clothing and objects collected from the room. The list of items taken included one pair of Levi blue jeans, size 32-34, one pair of blue cutoff sweatpants, one pair of Fruit of the Loom black sweatpants, one small pocket knife with a handle shaped like a car, one wire clip, one pair of Guess jeans, one dark blue Tutlex long-sleeve sweatshirt, 3XL, one black Raiders t-shirt, one pair of Britannia shoes, size 9.5, 10 assorted baseball caps, and one Cleveland Indians baseball cap. Later, Barbara told someone that detectives had taken her husband's clothing instead of Eddie's, though detectives believed that was not true. Cindy was the next person detectives spoke to, a woman who had known Opal for nearly 30 years. Cindy said she met Dave through Opal about 7 years earlier. She remembered Opal having problems with Dave because of his addiction to rock. She said he would steal Opal's money and disappear for days. Once Cindy heard that Dave pushed Opal during an argument, but she said that was the only time she ever heard of him being violent. Cindy said Dave had a girlfriend named Tammy that he would run off with to use rock. She also noted that Opal herself had struggled with substance use a year or two before and had lost a noticeable amount of weight. She said the last time she socialized with Opal was January of '95. Cindy said she believed Opal was selling about 1.5 ounces of green per week, with around 30 regular buyers. She said she had heard from Opal's mother that Dave was even into opioids. Cindy said Opal and Dave had feuds, broke up, reunited, and broke up again, and that Dave was now living with a woman named Diana, whose husband had passed only a month before Opal. Cindy said she heard from Opal's sister Vicky that Opal had passed, and she found out about it around 8 a.m. the next morning. Her husband Greg had been home because he worked evenings. When detectives asked whether Greg came home early the night before, Cindy was unsure at first, then said he had left work because he was upset with how he'd been treated. Greg later got 2 weeks off work due to everything going on. Cindy told detectives that Dave owed a lot of money to a lot of people, including Waylon, the owner of the bar. She also said Dave had an uncle at the sheriff's department who told Dave there was a hit out on him. Cindy said she and Greg had been present when Randy told Dave to tell them about it. Dave dismissed it and gave Randy a dirty look. Cindy said that everyone she spoke with felt Dave was involved somehow. The following day, Cindy called detectives hysterical, shouting, refusing to listen, insisting her family was in danger because her husband was being accused of Opal's unaliving. She said she had contacted the press, a civil rights group, and a legal firm. She said she had suffered 2 heart attacks since Opal passed and that her heart had stopped for 6 minutes. The conversation became impossible, and detectives ended the call. Later, detectives interviewed Greg. Greg said he was never good friends with Dave and believed Dave didn't like him because Opal did. Greg said he met them both through his wife, who had been Opal's childhood friend. He said he had stopped socializing with Dave after Dave smoked rock during a pool league game. Greg said he once loaned Dave $150 for a car and was never paid back. Greg said he heard about Opal's passing the next morning. When detectives asked why he clocked out early the night before, Greg gave multiple versions. First, he said his wife's car broke down and he left work early. Then he said he went home to fix it. Then he described something else entirely, a vision. Greg said that while staring into the flames of a furnace at work, he saw people fighting and a black male being taken down. Later, he said he looked at the ceiling and saw a black male lying deceased on the ground. He said he became worried because his nephew and wife drank and fought, so he left work to check on them. That, he claimed, was why he left early the night Opal passed. He said he never had visions before and wanted detectives to know he was legit. Greg agreed to take a polygraph as long as it didn't interfere with work. But later, in another call, he said he felt accused, that asking him to take the test was an attack on his character and that he needed to protect his family. His wife yelled in the background that Dave's woman worked there. Greg corrected her, saying it was Dave's brother's girlfriend, and said he would get her name. Detectives then interviewed Michael, who continued to deny that he knew anything about Eddie being involved in Opal's unaliving. He also denied ever telling a girl on the phone that Eddie had set up a burglary. Michael said he remembered seeing Eddie on the day of the unaliving, but only because Eddie had called him from his sister's house asking if Michael could get him some speed. Michael said he told Eddie he would see what he could do and asked him to call back. Eddie called about 10 minutes later. Michael told him he had 3 hits. Eddie said he would be over after he got something to eat and promised to bring him a burger. Michael said Eddie showed up between 7 and 8 that evening. He wasn't sure of the exact time. He said Eddie's girlfriend was the one driving him. Michael said that after giving Eddie the 3 hits of speed, Eddie stayed for only about 5 minutes before leaving. Michael then gave a taped statement. Detectives also spoke with Dennis, a man who claimed that Dave and Opal had not been getting along. Dennis said Dave had stolen Opal substances before and that he believed Dave set her up to be robbed again. He said Dave was the only one who knew that Opal had just gotten some green and that she was going to be alone that night. Dennis believed Opal had fought against someone trying to rob her and that this was why she was unalived. He said Dave had been hooked on rock very badly and owed a lot of people money. He also said Dave owed a man named Terry a large amount of money and felt that Terry had also played a role in what happened to Opal. Dennis said he believed Dave and Terry set up Opal to be robbed and that the person who went inside her apartment got carried away and unalived her. He said he knew Opal had just gotten some green and believed she might have had up to a pound or more in the apartment that night. Dennis said Waylon, the owner of the bar, sent him over to Gary's house to confront him and get the green back. But when he arrived, Dennis and Gary ended up talking instead of fighting. Dennis said Gary admitted that he knew Dave. Dennis told detectives he wasn't sure who supplied Opal with her green, but said he believed it was either a man named Charlie or a man known simply as T. He said he was scared because he felt he knew too much and that he believed someone would hurt him because of it. Dennis said he was willing to take a polygraph. A week later, when detectives called to follow up, Dennis said he still wanted to take the test, but his therapist told him to wait a couple of weeks. Detectives tried to contact Dennis again about 3 weeks later, but he did not return any of their calls. His mother told detectives that Dennis had moved. They continued trying to reach him, but he never responded. When detectives finally spoke with Dennis again, he insisted he was still willing to take the polygraph, but wanted to wait until after the holidays. When detectives called back after the holidays, Dennis accused them of harassing him and his girlfriend. He insisted that something needed to be done about a 3-year-old report his girlfriend Tracy had filed. Throughout the call, Dennis kept saying he wanted to cooperate, but he would not give a straight answer about taking the test. Opal's ex-husband Larry was interviewed next. He said a neighbor told him about Opal's unaliving on Wednesday morning at around 10. He said he last saw Opal on Monday night at the Winding Bar. He and Opal got along even though they weren't legally divorced. Larry said they had been separated for a long time, but he still went to see her at work. He said they talked for a while until her boyfriend arrived. He said he didn't see any exchange of words or tension between Opal and Terry that night. Larry said he was not in Barberton on Tuesday. He said he worked with his father on a rental property until around 1 in the afternoon. After that, He stayed at his father's house until about 6 that evening. Larry said he drove by the bar on his way home to see if Opal was working, but when he didn't see her car, he continued home. He said he got home around 6:30 or 7 and didn't leave again that night. Larry admitted there was no one who could verify that he stayed home. He said he and Opal still got along and that he picked up their daughter every Thursday between 6 and 9. When detectives asked if he knew anyone who would hurt Opal, Larry said no. Then he mentioned the black guy upstairs. He said he knew that Opal had sold substances to him before and that he had seen the man inside her apartment a long time ago. He said Opal had never told him she was scared of the man. Opal's daughter said she woke around 7 a.m. Tuesday morning at Tammy's house, where she had stayed the night. She got home around 7:30. Her mom was awake. She watched TV and played. Joe, Dave's boss, came by around 11 in his white van, and Dave left with him to go to work. She spent much of the day at a friend's house. She didn't see Dave return. She said she got home between 4 and 5 p.m., and her mom made her pizza rolls. Opal was watching a talk show. She remembered her mom talking on the phone to Tammy and Sherry. She said Dawn from upstairs visited between about 3 and 8. Dawn left about half an hour before Tammy's boyfriend Mike picked her up in his red car. Her mom was cooking ribs and noodles for dinner with Dave. She said her mom and Dave argued often, but she never saw either hit the other. She said no one came over that day to fight. And that is where the statements end. A case full of contradictions, rumors, fear, and missing pieces, all circling the last night Opal was seen alive. The truth is buried somewhere inside these voices. But the story isn't over yet. Detectives were left with shifting timelines, inconsistent stories, and a neighborhood full of people who claimed they knew nothing, even though many of them were close enough to hear everything. Somewhere inside that confusion is the moment Opal lost her life. And even now, decades later, the most haunting questions still remain unanswered. One of those questions is simple. Why didn't detectives bring Eddie back for a second polygraph? His first test came back inconclusive. Everyone knows substances can affect the results. Everyone knows a retest, once he was sober, could have changed the entire direction of this case. But they never brought him back. They never tried again. They simply let it go. And then there's Dave. Dave was the only person who knew Opal was home. He was the only one who knew she had called off work and would be alone. He knew she had just gotten green. He had stolen from her before. He owed people money. Of course, all allegedly's home. If anyone could have set the stage for what happened in that apartment, it was him. And if you look at the evidence, it raises a question no one wants to say out loud. Why wasn't Dave charged? Not even with setting her up. Because the pieces fit. It's not hard to imagine Dave telling Gary, "Now's the time." But Gary might not have wanted to be the one to go inside. Maybe he backed out. Maybe he didn't want the violence. Maybe he only wanted the money. Backing away doesn't mean the plan disappeared. Because when Gary stepped back, he allegedly turned to Eddie. Eddie, known for his temper, his unpredictability, and his history of violence, became the one Gary allegedly relied on. Eddie did roofing, and that meant he spent long stretches outside people's homes, sometimes a week or two at a time. You see everything when you're on a roof that long. Who leaves for work and when, who comes home early, who steps out just to run to the store. You learn people's routines without even trying. Eddie was allegedly the kind of man who noticed those patterns. He allegedly wasn't the type to hesitate, and he wasn't the type to walk away from an opportunity. And once Eddie was pulled into the situation, it isn't hard to imagine that he and Dave allegedly may have talked afterward. Dave had the information, Eddie had the aggression, and together they may have had something to gain and nothing to lose. And then comes the statement that still chills this entire case. Eddie told someone he didn't even get what he went in there to get. That means he went inside for something. He went inside with a purpose. He expected to take something, and he didn't. If that's true, it lines up with everything else. The missing green, the chaotic scene in the apartment, the violence, the witness who saw a white male in dark clothing with a backward two-tone cap near Opal's car, and the silence that followed. Because if Eddie went inside, someone else may have been outside, watching, waiting, ready to drive, ready to leave, and that someone could have been Dave. All of the scattered pieces, the debts, the secrecy, the rumors, the lies, finally begin to form a picture. But the most heartbreaking part of this case isn't the suspects. It isn't the failed polygraph. It isn't the missed chance to retest evidence with today's technology. It isn't even the lack of new interviews after 30 years. It's Opal's daughter, a little girl who woke up at Tammy's house, came home to pizza rolls and a talk show, and had no idea her entire world was about to collapse. A little girl who grew up surrounded by adults with secrets, adults who had motives, adults who changed their stories, adults who knew far more than they ever admitted. A little girl who deserved better. This case stayed cold not because there were no answers, but because the right people stayed silent. Why wasn't Eddie retested? Why wasn't Dave charged with anything? Why weren't the red-stained clothes re-examined with modern technology? Why weren't the key individuals brought back for new, sober polygraphs? Why wasn't this case reopened? Barberton dropped the ball, and it's time to pick it back up. Someone knows what happened on Sylvester Street. Someone knows who walked through that door. Someone knows who walked out. And someone has lived with the truth for 30 years. If you know anything at all, it is not too late. If you have any information about the death of Opal Hensley, please contact BCI at 1-855-BCI-OIO, 1-855-224-6446. If you have an unsolved case or a missing person you would like me to cover, you can email me at 360@gmail.com. Because every story deserves a second look, and every victim deserves a voice.